start with the
Yes,
announcements?
yes. Welcome to the Planning Policy Commission of October 11th. And since we don't have a chair or a vice chair tonight, Lindsay has offered to be the chair if it's okay with the rest of the commission. And if that would be the case, we would need a motion to propose that she be officially our chair for tonight.
I'd like to motion that Lindsay act as chair for this meeting on October 11th.
A second?
I'll second.
A vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Excellent. Carry it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Now we can have a meeting. So tonight's meeting is a public hearing on the land use code amendment around extending we had previously talked about the compact public schools, and now we're moving on to the municipal buildings and government facilities. And so I think you've got a presentation for us, and then there is a proposed code amendment that we are reviewing before it goes to City Council, correct?
Yes, yes. The background is, you mentioned last year, you worked on a code amendment for compact schools, and the term government facilities was part of the code amendments back then. And one of the first things you all did was propose to remove the government facilities out of the amendment because there was so much going on at that time with a proposed school in the Highlands that you didn't want to be distracted with anything else, and you just wanted to focus on the school piece. So we told you at that time we would be bringing it back when we had more time to ponder this one, and you all said that was totally okay with you, but we just couldn't have done it back then in 2017. So in the meantime, council adopted the the compact public schools, so that's on the books now. And so today, we're bringing you back a new and improved version of the amendment, and we're calling it municipal buildings now to sort of broaden the umbrella, if you will, of what the structures and buildings. They don't have to just be government. They can be well, you can see there's a definition, but we thought this term made more sense for us than the previous one. And we need them for future municipal buildings that we're hoping come online in the future. So we just want to be able to use our land efficiently as we did when we did the code amendment for schools. The purpose and intent, what I did also, just to remind those of you that were here last year, the yellow is what we amended last year for compact public schools, and the green is the new information. That's the proposal, so that you don't think everything is new and, oh my gosh, where did this come from? It sort of gives you sort of the step-by-step how we did compact schools and then how we want to integrate municipal buildings into that same amendment. So we put it into the purpose and intent. Instead of just schools, it's buildings and structures. So that's pretty straightforward. And then this is the wonderfully full of all the examples definition that would also go into the Issaquah Municipal Code. We figured we are trying to cover just about everything we could imagine in the definition, so that when they come in, they would be covered by this. And here's the table. The only piece that we're changing in the table, other than the title, so it relates to municipal buildings as well, is originally this was taken out of the central standards. And in the central standards, there's a base FAR, which is floor area ratio, and a maximum floor area ratio. And there's a base height and a maximum height. Well, when we moved this over from central, for some reason, we chose the base of the category instead of the max, which is very confusing. So we now are changing it to, you have a minimum floor area ratio and a maximum floor area ratio. And then on the building height, you can go up to 65 feet, because we thought that made it a lot clearer for an applicant than base, because a base doesn't mean anything unless you have a maximum. So we tried to clarify that. Any changes on that? Any questions? The other piece that is not in your packet, and I apologize for that, is going back to the central standards and making sure that the footnote is the same, so that if you happen to be looking this up in central, it doesn't just refer to public school, compact public schools, it also refers to municipal buildings as well. But that's a pretty basic one as well. And here's some examples, which we had fun finding. This is Puyallup. They have an FAR of not even 1.94, and there's the lot size, so you can do the math. A nice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories. It looks like it's on a pretty small lot. Public area out in front. That's our first example. The next one is a little more dense. This is Bothell. It's a floor area ratio of 1.3. It's a fairly new one. You can see lots of areas for public, many stories. There's probably parking tucked under in the back. So there's another example. And then this one is a 2.1, which would be over our maximum FAR, but we still thought it was worth showing you. This is in Vancouver, Washington, with a FAR of 2.1. Are there questions on any of those, on any of the examples? Okay. The next steps after tonight, if you take public comment and talk to each other about what you think about this one, then it would go to the City Council in November, and Land and Shore Commission would talk about it in December, and perhaps January as well if they want 2 meetings on it, and then it would be approved, or they would take action early next year. Are there?
Go back to the definition, Trish.
Yes. Is it missing something?
I don't see her during the week.
Would you like to introduce yourself, Keith?
I'm Keith Niven, Director of Development Services. So as I read a definition for municipal buildings, I'm having trouble with county and school district being listed as municipal buildings because I don't think they are.
Oh.
So probably this was originally entitled governmental buildings or something, and then as we changed the title to municipal buildings, I'm not sure that county buildings are not technically municipal buildings, and school district and water and sewer district. So I think we have a little bit of I think we have a logistic issue with the definition that we might need to work
Because state and federal also are not
Right.
No.
municipal.
Yeah.
Yeah, my one comment was we have, at the beginning, local government entity, and then later we say state and federal. So there's just a little wordsmithing there, I think. Yep.
Okay.
So do, like, school administrative buildings or offices, they fall in line with the
compact school.
the compact school? Okay.
Right.
Trish, I was wondering if we were able to have a definition of compact schools. Right now, we have number 4 of compact facilities.
Right, and that's in the comp plan amendment coming forward to
Right.
you that you saw a couple weeks ago. The proposed definition for compact school and urban school are in that package.
I guess I felt like in this right now, it's just, it's a little large, its term, allow the sitting of the public building structures more efficiently as the city continues to diversify. I didn't find number 4 to be, have much clarity, which is kind of the whole point of us giving definitions of these terms.
Right, well, that's the purpose and intent statement. That's-
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But when we're talking about these terms, this is the background that we're giving the public to talk about things. So I didn't think this was terribly helpful. And so going into, I know you're telling me that we have a definition that we have coming up, but it would be nice if some of that language was inserted in a way that when we're talking about these documents, when people are looking online and they're able
Oh,
to
so
say,
you remember the,
having a little bit of like, oh, this is what the intent is, if that makes sense.
right.
If you weren't in the middle of this discussion, it might be a little bit hard to glean from it what it was, and that's kind of the whole point of giving that background to everybody.
So a reminder of what the definitions are.
Yeah.
And then just a point of clarification, Trish, you noted you earlier had mentioned they don't have to just be government buildings, but in the definition it says provided and maintained by a local government. So are they a mixture between?
Right, and by entity, and I will always confer with my boss. We were thinking like the fire district would be part of that because it's government, but it's not like a city hall piece. And I thought the water and sewer district, that doesn't count as a municipal building?
Special purpose district.
Basically, we just need a few more definitions is what it sounds like. This needs to be
Okay.
broken up into like 3 or 4.
Or maybe we just need a different header.
It sounds like they all fall in
So-
different things.
So I guess the question is, I mean, so the definition seems to much more be suited to institutional buildings. And I guess the question is why did we land on municipal as opposed to, so why did we pivot from government to?
I was told that government was too limiting
Okay.
because we wanted the water district, the fire district, those to fit under this umbrella.
So if that was the intent, then, I mean, I would suggest swapping out municipal for institutional.
Okay, does that keep
So-
the intent?
I don't know. That's just an on-the-fly suggestion, so.
If you like that and it keeps it as one big bucket, I mean,
Yeah,
That's-
because
that's fine by
government
me.
can be institutions, so can fire districts and water and sewer districts. I think they all might fit within institutions.
Okay, and that, so then I get rid of local, maintained by a government entity or district?
Or you could put public entity
That was going to be my suggestion.
instead of local government.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
And then do we need to remove the school district portion as well?
We certainly could because they're covered under the compact school.
Yeah.
And then we could put in state and federal offices, we could put those back in?
So it looks like we have to remove school district and public schools.
and add those definitions of compact school.
But I'm missing, so is there more than just public schools?
Line 4, school district, line 5, public schools.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, anything else?
I had a thing about D3 height. I get the intent is to try to have these public utilities not be view blocking, I believe is what the intent is to be able to, keep our view corridors and whatnot. But to me, it seemed important, I was curious if there was somewhere else that needed to basically state that these should have the smallest footprint possible, that it shouldn't just be a height
That's-
limitation, that it's also a matter of building only to what we need rather than necessarily sprawling out.
Right, that's in the standards, I believe.
Okay.
God, this is blurry.
It's just D3 specifically mentions the height, and so I didn't remember seeing a spot where it specifically mentioned like
There it is.
efficiency of
Down,
No,
down.
Did you see it?
Up.
Up.
There.
There it is.
development standards. Is it right above it?
It's probably easier to read. Oh, it's not easier.
Right in the
to
middle.
read.
It's the green, it's the green.
The
All crossed
area,
out?
Sub-area, minor
Actually below it, isn't it?
utilities, exceptions, exemptions?
Yeah, height is where
Okay.
3.
As long as you see it, I don't see it.
You could always hold control and scroll in, that'll make it bigger.
The screen, it's super blurry, so I'm not
Oh,
sure that would help
okay.
my eyes to. But I know that it's in there somewhere because we talked about that, and I know it's in the policies too for urban schools and compact about the smallest footprint possible, to go up versus out.
Okay. We specifically talk about height there, but I just don't remember seeing something for public utilities about being efficient of space everywhere, not just not only in height.
Right. I can check, but I thought it was in here somewhere.
Okay.
So I'm sure we have questions, but since this is a public hearing, do we want to open it up to the public, ask for comments, and then we can come back to our discussion?
Oh, that.
Sure.
Okay. So at this time, I would like to open the public hearing to anybody who would like to comment.
Can I just comment from here, or?
you have to go up to the podium, state your name, and then you can give us your opinion.
Dress usually too.
Oh, yes, your name and address.
Okay. My name is Julian Midlow, and I live at 11 Sunset Court, Northwest Issaquah. For the terms back in the definition, I would be suggesting that instead of municipal, we have it like administrative or something like to that effect. That's just my comment for that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And seeing no one else for the public hearing, we'll go ahead and close comments there. And so, what do you guys want to discuss? I know I have a few things, so.
I just have one other specific question. And that was on the little tiny print up there. On D9A, under impacts, we made a change from designed to minimize adverse impacts on nearby. That's now been changed to adjacent residential properties.
Right.
Does that literally mean sharing about, I mean, like adjacent, right?
Right, and
Okay.
nearby doesn't have a
It's
definition.
very big, yeah.
So
Okay, good.
adjacent
That's what I
is
was
a defined
thinking.
term.
Okay, perfect. That's all.
Anybody else?
Trish, did you find somewhere else in the document where we, instead of talking about exclusively height, we also talk about?
Oh, no, I wasn't looking for that, but I can look for that.
I could have missed it. I just remember, I didn't think that I'd read. We specifically called that out for our public utilities. Lindsay, did you have?
Yeah, so I've got a few things here. On the table, we mention impervious surface and pervious surface. We're not saying minimum or maximum there. I think that might be nice to clarify for somebody reading it, just as a general thought. And then I wanted to bring it back to the larger question of, we separated this out from public schools. Do we feel like there is anything in particular that we should be discussing for government or municipal buildings that would be different from schools? Is there anything that we see that we want to make sure gets called out in this arena?
Well, I think for me, it was just that continuing the concept of efficient use of space. I appreciate the consideration of our view corridors. That's something that also draws back to other things that we've worked on and bringing that in the code, but just making sure that we're not having a ridiculous amount of concrete where we don't need it. It's easy to be like, well, this is, there's a bench here, so it's, it's for the public space, but no one's using it. So instead, let's actually talk about efficient use of our space rather than just one aspect of how public buildings are being used and built. Anybody else?
I had a question about flagpoles. I didn't notice any type of written language for standards. Typically, municipalities will have flagpoles outside of their buildings. Is there any type
Right.
of language about that?
I think those are considered, I want to say architectural, not impediments, architectural,
Elements,
Elements.
there's a longer word, but I can see it in the code, but it's one of those. But there are standards for how high those can go. And it's because they're flagpoles, they're usually pretty high, there's not a lot of limitations on stuff like that. But there is a part in the code that talks about those kinds of things.
One thing I noticed, let's see, I guess it's got to be still D? No, in E16, it says all new public schools and municipal buildings shall provide 50% of the required parking and structures. I assume that's supposed to be a minimum of 50%. We don't want anybody to have to hit it on the nose.
no.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly 50%, even if that means half of a parking space. Yeah. Do we have any concerns about the idea of the floor area ratio being between 0.75 and 2, requiring any sense of overbuilding with a government facility? Okay, just making sure, going through. Do you know what the floor area ratio is? I know we've got 2 of our fire stations that are fairly tall, I think 72 down here and 73 up in the Highlands. Any sense of what the FAR is? I'm just trying to get a sense if there's anything that we have that meets our needs that doesn't necessarily fit within.
So we can see if we can figure that out really quick.
I think we have a building that's bigger than 2.
No, I mean under the 0.75.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because the 0.94 that they showed was something like 3 or 4 stories.
Yeah, the Puyallup one.
Yeah, and like, the fire station over here, I believe is 2 stories, and the one in the Highlands is 2 stories. And so I just wonder if there's any.
So the building square footage is 11,000 and the lots, so it's a 0.3. The Highlands Fire Station.
Just close.
And then, the one by the transit center. Mm. 11,000 square feet, and it's on 25,000 square feet, so it's close to a 0.5. I can get my calculator out and figure it out, but it's closer to a 0.5.
So if both of those are under the floor area ratio, does that suggest that we might need to rethink any of that?
So, so this is a great conversation to have. We're just starting to talk to the school district about their next schools that they would build under the compact requirements. They're going to have a tough time getting to 0.7. That's a big number for them. So, you know, because of the laundry list in the definition, you know, there's going to be some things that are going to want to be more open space than not. And we talked about whether you could exclude recreational amenities because most public facilities have some sort of recreational component associated with it. You know, I think if we build a new city hall, we're going to easily hit the FAR. I'm not worried about that. So the question is if we're doing a fire station or something else, is it going to be a little bit of a challenge to get to a 0.7? My guess is yes, it will.
Yeah.
You know, I'm surprised that you know, my sense of both those fire stations we just looked at is they're packed on their site. And so to see that they're coming out closer to a 0.3 to a 0.5 FAR is interesting. So.
Yeah. So I wonder if there are any sense of certain facilities that have differing requirements, such as a fire station maybe needing more area for driveway or something like that for the bigger vehicles, or like you mentioned with a community facility like the community center, having a large open lawn area is
yeah.
going to cut down on its floor area ratio. So how do we address that in the code?
You make a bigger range, right? I mean, so maybe the range goes, instead of 0.7 to 2, maybe it's 0.4 to 2.
Or when the fire station is building out, they say, you know what, instead of building God's own fire station, we'd rather build 2 smaller ones because it's easier for us to access the community from these different points. Then they're granted an exemption from the council, right? I mean, this doesn't lock anybody in because people are able to like make their case and say there's a reason we should be excluded rather than necessarily lowering the bar for all buildings.
Yeah.
Is there a way we can go between that and recognize some of the things that would need?
So you guys can basically start to precede like an administrative adjustment of standards. So you could leave it at 0.7 to 2 and footnote the 0.7 to include considerations for either operational requirements like a driveway for a fire station, or public amenities like greens, or things that are just we're going to have, if we build a new city hall, there's going to be a big plaza. There will be, and that will not count towards an FAR. It'll be 0 because it'll be surface area. So you could do it that way so that it's not just giving full discretion, but it's saying, okay, these are some of the things, that the director has discretion maybe to lower it based on operational requirements, including things like, driveways or greens or other public amenities. I don't know. I'm, again, just talking.
I have a question just for a little bit of context. The 2 Issaquah transit centers, the one up in the Highlands and the one down here near Maple Street, what are those as far as FARs?
And would those be included in this type of government facility?
So the hard thing about FAR is we typically don't include parking. So the question about a transit center or a park and ride garage is it's really parking, except that, like for example, if you were looking at a car dealership, those cars are not parking, they're actually inventory. So it looks the same, but it's counted differently from a planning perspective. The transit center is 248,000 square feet of building, and it sits on 194,000 square feet of property. So that's above a 1.0 FAR. It's probably 1.25, doing loose math. The other one is, the King County one is probably going to come out really differently because it has a huge, it's on, at least it'll be interesting to see. My intuition is it's on a bigger piece of property. So it's 311,000 square feet of building, and it's on 170, so it's close to 2. So bigger building, bigger piece of property, but yeah, its FAR is close to 2. So, okay. What else can I look up for you guys?
That's a 2, and you're telling me that the school district's going to have a hard time making 0.7?
So school district,
That's all right. They're going to have a hard time making the minimum.
so the fields are the problem.
Yeah.
Unless they put the field on the roof, the field is the problem. So middle school's got a track and a soccer field, lacrosse field. High school's got track and a football field and a soccer field.
Are they still proposing to keep all these things separate?
So, I mean, we don't have plans because
Right.
they don't own property.
Right. Is the concept still to keep separate fields for all those uses?
No, so the track has the football field inside it, right? So the recreational facilities are commingled. I think there is a reason why it may or may not make sense for them to put it on the roof. So the roof, if you put, because those facilities of certain geometry, right? A track is 440 feet, right, in a loop. You can have a smaller track, but that's generally what it is. Soccer fields are a certain dimension, or else they're too small to actually play on.
Regulation, yeah.
So that then starts to prescribe how the building looks. Because you want windows in all your classrooms, having like a big rectangle isn't really probably the most conducive to getting natural light into all your classrooms. So there starts to be some push and pull in terms of doing that. I think they are looking at that as a possibility. I just don't know that that's going to be the outcome that we're going to see when they come in for permits at some point. But again, all that speculation. They don't own property. There are no permits in. I'm just telling you what I think.
What is our densest or highest FAR school right now?
It's probably going to be Grand Ridge.
Okay.
You want to look?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right near there.
I'm almost there.
I'm so glad you're here tonight.
I mean, just thinking about, Clark opening up with portables and everything.
I know.
I'm surprised to think that just in terms of like the transit center space of 2, that we wouldn't be able to fill those classrooms. Throw in an art room, let's go nuts. Like, it just, even with obviously the field not counting towards it, I'm surprised.
Okay, I'm actually going to pull out a calculator because
Yeah.
I think I gave you some bogus numbers earlier. Not really, but 509. So Grand Ridge is a 0.14 FAR.
Well, obviously, this meeting isn't getting into the school arena, but I think we have brought up some questions, certainly, about public facilities and their ability to meet that FAR, given their operational constraints.
I mean, I like the idea that Keith raised of keeping it as is, as, this is what we want, but then having a footnote or some other guidance in there that there could be exceptions for public space or operational needs or, whatever.
But that's what the whole chart is.
Yeah.
That's what all the buildings are.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, yeah. Well, it's a good question. So then do you lower it to 0.4 or?
No, I tend to think if we keep the
Okay,
bar high,
so
we tend to get closer to what we want.
You're at least making
so
discretionary decisions.
Issaquah High School's over 1.
What about Gibson?
Really?
Now, what I would tell you though is, there's too many kids at Issaquah High School. I think they would like it to be less dense than it is at the moment, which is one of the reasons why they are wanting to build a new high school, is to decrease the student population at Issaquah High down to I think a more manageable number.
The Gibson Eck that they redid, is that sort of across the street and over?
Sort of. I might have to switch to actually aerial photographs so that I don't grab the wrong thing
Take
since
it out of the sky.
you made me go there. Okay.
It's north.
It's north?
Yeah. Gibson Neck is right by the pool.
It's that, right?
No.
No?
You're down by Issaquah Middle and Issaquah High School, right?
I thought that's where they put Gibson Eck.
I thought that's where it was too.
No, it's right next to
Is it by
the pool.
Bones Pool?
Yeah.
Where the middle school was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Gibson
Okay.
Neck is, where are you?
So there's the pool.
Yeah, so is that 301?
That?
No, that's the community center.
Okay.
So it'd have to be up on the hill like 91 or 335?
It's
or
this,
3
it's this. So
Bus barn?
one of these is Gibson Neck and the other is the middle school, right? So the middle school's got the baseball field and the track. So that's middle school right there. So I assume this thing is Gibson Neck. But what do I know? I've not actually been on the
Isn't-
campus since they've done it.
Isn't the track the high school?
I don't have
The one
internet.
next to the track, the high school?
Yeah. Yeah, the bottom one is the high school, the top one is the middle, Issaquah Middle School.
And then what's 3355? Are those just houses?
Isn't that the church
Oh,
over there?
3355, oh, that?
355?
No, I think those are condos, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, those are condos.
Well, that's wild.
That was the old Tiger Mountain.
The old, oh, okay, because I thought Gibson Eck, they repurposed another building and made it into a really small.
The old IMS was.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
right by the pool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right across from the pool. So which one's the pool?
So that, the pool is.
So the
50
pool's 50.
So it should be like 91 or 379.
This?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on,
That's the old middle school.
379.
yeah, it's 379.
Whoa.
So it's all on the same parcel.
Oh,
So, I mean, I tell you what Gibson Eck and the middle school is in combination.
Man, that's a lot of land.
So it's,
yeah, that's
I
not
mean,
going to give us.
it's a quarter. It's 0.25 maybe.
It's great, there's a bulldozer in front.
Yeah.
There's a track hoe. It's under construction. So, so I think you guys have brought up a good point, and that is, so the 0.7 to 2 could be aggressive for public buildings.
Yeah. Perhaps is there a way that we can separate out some of these different public buildings that are going to have different uses and maybe different FAR requirements?
You have to have an exhaustive list then of, water utility versus fire. Right now, we have this kind of bucket of, it could include all these things, but not limited to.
Yeah.
So if you want to start parsing it out, we would need to have an exhaustive list of this is every possible,
Yeah.
it would include administrative buildings, it would include, recreation, it would include all the different things that we have in a bucket right now.
So the point, going back to why we're doing this, whether it's the city or if the county were to build a new courthouse or, Water and Sewer District, we're going to try and build a new facility. Land's super expensive for everybody, right? One of the reasons why we did compact schools was the school district, the existing provisions of community facilities, which said you had to build to the lowest standard of your neighbor. That meant it had to be a low-density project, and I think that then meant that you had to buy a really big piece of property to build it. So we went down that pathway for the school district, and I think we're trying to do something similar with the understanding that at some point, the city is going to want to build a new municipal building, and not wanting to have to buy enough land to make sure it's a single story if that's the height of the surrounding land uses. So the question is are we creating a too compact of an expectation for what those uses really are? I think we've shown at least some city halls that range anywhere from, remind me, Trish, 0.6 to 2?
Yes, pretty much.
So, and we looked at a couple fire stations that I think we perceive as being fairly dense, and those are more like 0.3 to 0.5. So, I think if we're going to, so there's choices. Either one, we subdivide the definition and create more subcategories, which seems like we'd have to go back and do some more research in terms of figuring out what are reasonable compact versions of those types of uses. Or we leave it as is, and we put a footnote in terms of what's reasonable to allow for reduction in the FAR. Leave all the rest of the standards the same, so building heights and setbacks are the same, but what would be a reasonable allowance for reduction in the FAR?
And for who?
Well, it'd be for anybody, if it's in the table, so.
They'd have to justify it. They'd come in and explain why they needed the
Right.
variance,
Right. Yeah, it seems like we need some type of study of, where are we at today? And in my mind, we're not hitting that range because they've never been held to a standard to hit that range. And I think we could do a lot through design. If we hold the standards high where we know they need to be to support our growth, we can design that to work. If they can't, then we bring it back. But when we looked at fire stations, those were in the range. We found a school that was within the range. We've seen examples of city halls in other towns that were well within the range. It can be done. I'm hesitant on lowering standards because of the current design standards that are in place today.
I agree.
So just a quick question. I agree with the concept, but can I question where the .75 number originally came from? Was it based on information of what other cities have done? Was it based on where we'd like to be? Did we talk to any of these agencies about what they felt like they could accomplish?
My recollection of the .75 was it was an existing FAR standard in Central, not for CFF, but for maybe mixed use or I'd have to go back and look at those tables. But I think it was a standard we had already adopted for kind of Central, which is what we envisioned to be more urban standard at the end of the day. So that seemed like that was a good parallel to give to something that we were calling compact schools.
Yeah.
I also remember in the discussion talking about what are we going to get, this versus this versus this. Like we settled on that number because we liked the result. Does that?
Right, because, the range in central is .75 to 2.
Right.
So I think that's why we chose that range for
I remember when we were
compact
looking at,
schools. and-
versus 0.5 and.
Right.
I agree. I like what it could get us. My only question is, does it create too many, asking for differences, as is wont to happen with school districts and municipal buildings?
Well, using the school district as an example, anybody could do this when talking about these public facilities. If they're like, we're having a really hard time getting to the .75, but it's 5, then what's to say they're not like, ooh, it's so hard to get to the .5. You know what I mean? Like, there has to be at some point where you just say, no, this is the point. We are having high density. So while we would all like to be in a country schoolhouse, that's not what that's not the direction we're going.
So I completely agree. My next portion of the concern is the idea of these fire stations or something like that, where we see something that maybe it would require a lot of overbuilding.
I don't think that's going to happen, because I think what's going to happen is they're going to raise the amount of money that they need, from the community and from taxes. They're going to say this is where the need is. I mean, maybe it's naive to think that the fire station is going to be like, hey, let's start putting in pool tables and, let's put in, all these different amenities we don't need. I think that they're going to build to the need, and they're going to approach council saying, look, this is not what we want. This is what we want, and we don't care whether it fits. We want you to say if this is okay.
Yeah.
I think it's the more likely scenario.
Yeah, I agree.
So is staff comfortable with that idea of putting forth something that is inevitably going to require lots of exemptions or requests?
So let's, real quick, so why do we automatically anticipate that we have to start giving out exemptions, though? If we think these are sound standards and we find out in the next several permits that they simply can't, they can't build what the city needs within these, then we come back and we talk about it, and city council eventually modifies them if we need to modify them. But seems like we're very quick to say, you know, how many exemptions are we going to give out? Is that really the default practice that we want to do? Because it kind of it violates all the, you know, all the guidelines. I'd rather rest on the side of, hey, we've been trying to build a firehouse for 3 years and we can't meet the design density standards. Well, let's revisit the density standards that make sense.
I think we want our codes to set standards that are,
Attainable.
yeah, attainable but also beneficial for our community. I wouldn't want to block a fire station from being built for 3 years or however long it would take us to come back to code and get it through the process.
Well, what was that? Was it the Highlands whose fire station was 0.5? And I didn't necessarily think like, my God, that's the largest fire station I've ever seen. So that being said, maybe maybe they can make 0.7 but not 0.75. I mean, it's kind of one of those things that I agree kind of needs to be a one-off basis. So we see, look, we've had a ton of one-off bases.
So Keith, back to the question. Do you feel comfortable putting something into code that looks
So
like
you
it's
still
going to
back this
require
number, yeah.
exemptions?
No. I think you guys are trying to find that sweet spot between pushing the land developer, whether it's a public school or a private party or the city,
Especially the city.
to build something that is different than what they did previously when maybe land was more readily available. And even though you can look at the fire, whether you're looking at the fire stations or the existing schools and saying, you know, maybe those feel like they fit in with those neighborhoods, you know, what we're talking about is our neighborhoods are going to be getting denser where we're putting these facilities, right? There will be, you know, the 2-story buildings will no longer be the norm. It's going to be the 4-story, 5-story, 6-story buildings. So then a 2-story fire station looks maybe like it's undersized at that point. You know, and so maybe at that point it needs to be a 3-story fire station, maybe with an extra bay. So we're at this point where we're not trying to look in the rearview mirror and say, do these standards fit, you know, what they've done? The answer is definitely no. The question is how far of a reach is it to get from what they want to do now to meet these standards, and can they get there? And I don't know the answer to that just yet. You know, if the school district were to come back and say, and I'm just using them because they're probably going to be the first ones through the gate, but fire station, we got to build a new fire station. That's in the works right now. Is it going to be able to meet a 0.7? Don't know, because nobody's drawn up plans yet. So far, the architects haven't screamed about that, but they don't know about it because this is what we told them, is we were going to try to change the code to give them something similar to schools. So if schools is 0.7, they should be knowing that this is going to land at 0.7. So I'm going to say, if you guys liked the examples that we gave you, I don't know, do we have a time sensitivity on this, Trish?
I just knew it was the fire station whenever that was coming in.
So we can do a little bit more looking at examples of institutional facilities, if that's what we decide to call this, and bring back just FAR, nothing else but FAR. I mean, I haven't heard any other questions about building heights or setbacks. So if you guys want us, and I think you guys were comfortable with City Hall examples, and I think that seemed like none of those were really crazy in my mind. So, you know, the range that we've picked, I think would work for City Hall. So it's really sleuthing maybe some of those other examples in the definitions to say, okay, we went and we looked at stuff regionally. and here's what they are, and here's what their FARs are, and then you guys can maybe have a better conversation about whether it makes sense to change the range, keep it the same, or create subcategories. Does that make sense?
I just want us to be good stewards of our land, especially, I think, when we're going to ask for these kinds of sacrifices in a sense, and these kind of, having people think differently than we have, the city really needs to be the forefront of that and say, look, we are going to be that example for other development in our city,
Yeah, and I think that the research would be time well spent, because then when it eventually does go to council, I mean, it'd be good to have those, they'll have the same questions. It'd be good to have those examples, and it'd be good to actually have, this exercise that we went through to just, there are buildings that everybody around here is familiar with, so
Right.
it'd be good examples for context as well.
I think we've done that before. I'll bet that Trish has it in a file somewhere of,
Not these, but we could do it. We could certainly do it.
Along those lines, do you know if there are any other cities that have created code around municipal or government buildings that might have some language about exemptions for public space or something like that? I'm thinking of like the community center and the fact that we've got Concerts on the Green there.
Right. I don't know. I think we can look, that's something we can look for as well.
Yeah.
To see if there are codes that exempt, whether it's amenity space or recreation space or something along those lines, just to give you guys, again, another piece of information to make a better decision on when we make the recommendation on this.
I think that would be useful information. I think we just have to consider, how we make those decisions going forward. So then what do we have a motion, or are we just waiting?
To continue on until, I would think you would probably want to not close the public hearing.
Okay.
If you want to take more public comment.
Well, won't it be
Right.
different? Oh, I guess it might not be
It may
different
not.
once we do the research.
So I mean, I think so they've already closed it, right?
Right, that's what I was saying, we could, I don't know how that works.
I mean,
Sort of.
yeah, I guess I would expect that the proposal that you bring back is going to be the same. What we talk about and decide at that point, based on your examples, might
Right.
change, right? But
Okay,
Right?
because if you wanted to continue the hearing to a date certain, the November 15th or 14th, 15th has opened up, because we're moving the comp plan public hearing to the 13th of December. So we could maybe have some research done to share with you. Are you around on that Thursday before Thanksgiving?
As far as I know.
Okay.
And so that had originally been a public hearing. It's in the Pickering room.
Right, because this room's already taken that night, so we'd be in the Pickering room that night.
Yep. We feel
So
like
that's
that's
an
a
option.
good,
That's the only open night you have for the rest of the year. No, isn't that wild?
yeah. Okay, so then that doesn't require a motion or anything,
Well,
does
you
it?
would have to announce that the public hearing is being continued to a
Date
date
certain.
and time certain, which would be 11/15/18 in the Pickering room at City Hall Northwest.
Okay, I would like to continue this public hearing to November 15th, a date certain there, in the Pickering room at City Hall Northwest. Okay. And do we have anything else before closing the meeting?
No, other than if you think of buildings in town that you're, like you're sort of giving them to Keith as he was going, if there are ones that you're curious about, if you send them early, we can try and get those into the research that we do, because it's always good to know which ones you're curious about. versus which ones we are curious about. So that would help, and then we'll bring it all back to you on the 15th. Good discussion.
Fantastic. So I think that leaves us to close the meeting at 7:26 PM.
Wow.
Okay.
Well done.
Yeah.